Okay, Palmer, we'll turn it over to you and I will get the slides going.
Okay. Hi,
Any
everybody.
slides?
First, I'd like to introduce Jen, who you all will see, who just
Mhm.
flew off the screen there, who is very kindly handling the slides so I don't have to. Um, she is the chair of the Legislative Action Committee, and she's amazing. And I think we all give it up for Jen.
Oh, thank
Also,
you. Right back at you.
my testimony. So it sounds really, really good. I am Pam McLaughlin. I am the Children and Family Specialist for the League of Women Voters of Massachusetts, which you probably all know, but I'm giving it to you anyway. And I would like to cover some of the bills that we are doing. I am actually a member of the Boston League as well, but I actually joined directly into the State League and directly on to the Legislative Action Committee and as the children's issues specialist. And 2 sessions ago, I said, can we add families to that? Because I strongly believe that children are attached to adults and they're parts of families. And so you have to look at the whole, take it as a holistic thing. So if Jen, you want to start the slides? Okay, the Legislative Action Committee is 20 volunteer specialists. We cover about 160 bills. I will tell you, they file between 7,000 and 8,000 for a 2-year hearing. We submit the we submit written testimony, we do oral testimony, we work with the envoys, we may suggest actions or things like that, and we actually look at the program priorities set by convention and at the national level. I will tell you, if anybody wants to volunteer, we could always use more help. As I said, they file about 7,000 to 8,000 bills right now it's 20 areas, but there are areas that we could probably use someone. Next slide, please. And if you go to the website, this is the slide you will see. If you go to the website, you can go down. From here, you can actually see our affordable housing, and you can see how it kind of will look for any one of us. You'll see the area, the bill numbers, kind of a topic, the name of it. And if you'll notice, there's a summary and there's the testimony when it's put in. Next slide. So as we suggested, we actually get them a lot of ways. A lot of us monitor it. We may belong to organizations outside of the league. In fact, we have a lot of that. Somebody might actually approach the league, or one of the other specialists might see a bill and they say, hey, that's your area. So we take a look at it. We go to the state. I actually go to the state first, and the national for our position policies, you can actually find them. It is where we stand for the State League on the State League website. It is impact on issues at the national level. These policy positions are kind of written kind of broadly. We see if they work together, if it's in the thing like that. We will also look to see if there's a coalition. These are 2 coalitions out there, election modernization and Common Start, which is early education. We'll look at the likelihood of passage. Is it a refile? Is it a new file? Who is sponsoring? Is it his member of leadership behind it? How many co-sponsors? These are the coalitions and the likelihood of passage, I mean, the number of co-sponsors, things like that, are not necessarily the most important thing. If it turns out to be something that is a bill that has maybe only a handful of sponsors, but it's an important bill, or the sponsors behind it are members of leadership, we might have one of those. So we actually look at all of these things and then we see how they all work together. Next slide. Here we are, impact on issues and where we stand. These are our Bibles, if you will. Next. So these are I tend to work with 2 sets of policy positions. I look at mostly child welfare. It's written as child abuse prevention and treatment. And I will look at meeting human needs, which are basic needs, and the domestic violence. I look at these are on the state website. I usually don't have to go to the national, but if we go to the next one, These are the national websites. We have a basic human needs. We have a violence prevention one. And what I was telling telling people just as everybody was coming in, today I found the original domestic violence policy position for the League. In the late 1960s, the first battered women's shelter in the United States opened up in California. The first ones outside of California opened here in Massachusetts and in Atlanta, Georgia. That was in the early 1970s. By that point, the League had adopted a domestic violence position. This was at a time when most people called it wife beating, but we adopted, the League adopted a violence prevention, domestic violence, and it consisted mostly of supporting shelters, supporting programs that would help women leave abusive marriages. The first restraining order did not come in until Pennsylvania, and I don't know if 76 or 77, 75, 76, 77. Massachusetts was one of the next couple, and our domestic violence, our restraining order, which is still called a 209A, came in 1978. And so we've been with this since the very beginning here, long history. Our current positions actually date back to 1994, and they are also virtually the U.S. positions, because the U.S. LWV U.S. adopted adopted by consensus at the 1994 convention the domestic violence provisions of several states. So they used a conglomerate. Massachusetts was one of those states. Next slide. All right, the first bills I'm going to go through are a couple of anti-poverty bills. They come under the basic needs. The League supports basic needs. We belong to 3 coalitions. One of them is Lift Our Kids. It's also the name of the legislation. Another one is Feeding Our Neighbors, also the name of the legislation. And the third one we have actually is kind of a legacy coalition. The League originally joined before I joined on legislation, but they have not had legislation there. And I kind of go to the meetings to keep up. There is overlap with a lot of these coalitions. So now let's go on to the bills. The first bill is an act to lift kids out of deep poverty. This is Marjorie Decker and Sal DiDomenico. This is the purpose, the history behind this grant is in 1996, they passed the Personal Responsibility and Work Authorization Act, which dramatically cut welfare benefits, at the time called AFDC, welfare benefits and food stamps to the country. And one of the things they actually put into that was what they called the cap on kids. That meant if you had ever applied and received any kind of basic benefits and you had another child, that child would never count for any kind of benefits. And that was problematic. I do remember there were cases where a woman would actually be in a domestic violence situation, leave her abuser, have to go back, we'll discuss all of that later, have to go back, have another child, try to leave again and find out that her next child or children were not covered. Another case, I met a woman who she was on disability. She had had her first child, had been on benefits, had married, gotten off benefits, divorced, been in a domestic violence situation again, left, and then she ended up on disability. What happened was she had 2 children, but and when her oldest aged out of the system, her daughter was still 11, but she was cut off from benefits because her daughter was a capped kid. So a couple of sessions ago, we had Lift Our Cap. We raised it. We actually had to pass that in the legislature 3 times. We passed it. The Governor Baker vetoed it. They passed it again in January of the following year. He vetoed it again. They had to pass it as an override. After that, this is the bill they came up with. What they want to do is raise the grant levels for TAFDC, which is temporary aid for families with dependent children, and the other one is aid to elders and disabled with children. It's a kind of weird acronym, and they had not been raised since 1988 and 2000 when we started on this. And what they are trying, and I actually just found this out in 1990. In the mid-1990s, the grant level at that point, the grant level that people were getting up until 2021 was the same grant level they were getting in the early 1990s. At that time, it covered 60% of the needs of people. By 2021, that same grant amount was what they were getting was only covering 37% of their needs. So we've gotten a couple of lifts through the budget, but the real part about this is to create a sustainable solution by setting a floor at half of the federal poverty level. In other words, federal poverty level, which is artificially low to begin with, and you can see the numbers there. It's $2,072 for a household of 3. Half the poverty level is $1,036 a month. Sometimes that is the only income they have. So you can just imagine that is your monthly income. But the key part about this bill is it will have incremental increases in the budget. We've been getting the incremental pieces, but it has to go through an amendment process every single year. It will create an automatic increase to maintain them at half of the poverty level. I will tell you, back in 1923, George Orwell published his first book, which was Down and Out in Paris and London, and he talked about living in poverty, and he said poverty annihilates the future. We have found that children who grow up in deep poverty stay in deep poverty as adults. 40% of them end up in deep poverty as adults, as compared to about 20% for those that are just in the top half of poverty. So we'd like you to ask them. The committee passed this out favorably last session. It did not make it all the way through. We're asking that you ask the committee, which is Children and Families and Persons with Disabilities, to vote the bill out favorably. Next. This is a new file this year, but it's actually kind of really follows along with the last one. The federal government cut off benefits to legally present immigrants. These are, as it says here, these are people who have temporary protective status. These are people that are dreamers. These are people that are waiting for things like U visas because they've been victims of crime. They do not qualify for cash benefits. If they do, it might be they have a 5-year waiting period. These people are actually parts of our community. They are mixed status. Sometimes they will have, a lot of them are in mixed status families. A lot of them will not apply for benefits even for their U.S. citizen children because, I'm sorry about the dog, animal control will be coming, also known as my son soon, because he's over there. This will actually, after the federal government cut them off, Massachusetts maintained the benefits until the early 2000s, and then they ended. They were not renewed. So this is actually, even though it says establishing, this is restoring. And one of the things that just came out yesterday was the U.S. Census Department data on childhood poverty. And what's happened since the child credit, tax credit expired a year ago, that the poverty rate for children went up from 5.2% to 12%. So we're getting a lot of statistics right now, a lot of data on what the difference means for being in poverty or getting just that much further. And we're finding that kids that get just that little bit more have better health outcomes. Their parents have better health outcomes. They're doing better in school. And we actually have a very hard and fast set of data that they are just starting to work through. I'd like to actually say at this point, Martin Luther King said child poverty is moral violence. And Cory Booker actually said we've now proven that poverty for children in America is not an accident. It is a policy choice. So I am asking, once again, we are asking for the committee to report this out favorably. And now you know what it is when we say it. We can, and are there, before I go any further, are there any questions on either of these bills that are kind of related on needs for families and children? All right, we can move on. All right. The next set of bills we have are kind of hovering around domestic violence. We are actually just joined a brand new coalition called Rising Above Coercion, or TRAC. This coalition was actually brought to us by Margie Palladino, who is currently washing her dishes because I can see her. Hi, Margie. She and another Wellesley League member formed a coalition of themselves and published a white paper on the family court system, and that's massfamily.org. I actually highly recommend anybody go look at their research. It's fabulous. And these are actually to advocate on two very important domestic violence bills, which we'll be going over. The ask actually is going to be a little bit different on here, or is a little bit different. The hearing for this was on Tuesday. I will be going over some of that on the bill slides. Our original ask was going to be, please ask the committee to report it out favorably, but we actually had a meeting with Natalie Higgins, which if anybody has been around, she's actually spoken to the league. She actually addressed the convention one year. And she said what they really need is they need voices from across the Commonwealth to make sure that their representatives and senators know about these bills and are signed on board with these bills. So there, as we go through it, you'll see the bills, but this is my ask right now. Make sure your elected leaders know about these bills. So let's kind of go over some of them right now. Just for background, these are what's called the power and control wheels. I actually have 3 of them in here. This is mostly for your benefit afterwards because you'll be getting the slides. This was actually created in 1984 by the Duluth, Minnesota, the Duluth Project. And what it is a kind of a graphic diagram of domestic violence. If you will look, we have power and control in the middle. We have all of the tactics around the outside, using coercion and threats, carrying out threats, threatening to leave, threatening to report them to the police or to DCF. Threatening to commit suicide, and using intimidation, destroying things, abusing pets, using emotional abuse, denigration, insults, making you feel dumb, making you feel guilty, playing mind games, using isolation, cutting people off from friends, family, or kind of even worse sometimes is having friends and telling friends and family how concerned they are that you are losing your mind. And crazy. Denying, minimizing, blaming. The famous one about this one is you'll get admission to some bad behavior, such as, I only slapped her, I didn't punch her. Yeah, tell me if a slap with the open hand still isn't abuse, but so you'll get things like that. Or they'll shift blame and say, well, you made me have to do this. They'll use children. They may also use other families, but they may use children, have children carry messages, threaten to take their children away, threaten to report them to DCF. Using male privilege, kind of sort of that. If you were a good wife, you'd have dinner on the table for me, or you would be making what I want, or you would be cleaning the house properly, or you would be hanging my shirts up all ironed in exactly 1.5 inches apart. I don't know if anybody ever saw the movie Sleeping with an Enemy. That was a fun one. And using economic abuse. I would like to actually pause on economic abuse a little bit, because in 100% of the cases of domestic violence, the research shows that there is some form of economic abuse. It could be requiring someone to turn over their paycheck, having only one name on the bank account, making people account for the amount of money they spend on budgeting, preventing them from getting a job. If they have a job, maybe calling them repeatedly. Massachusetts has actually passed some bills, some laws to protect women who have restraining orders, protect their employment. There is also a domestic violence leave bill, which allows women to take a certain number of days off to do things like find shelter, get medical appointments, appear at domestic violence hearings. So you have all of these things. None of those things in the middle are physical. And on the outside, that's where the physical is. If you'll notice, it's a band holding everything in. You know it's out there. They don't have to make it out there to the physical violence. It's a band holding everything in. And even if it gets physical once, it may not get physical again, but you know it's out there. Anyway, that's the power and control wheel. If we can move on to the next one. This is a very similar one, but if you'll notice, this also has on things like email, tracking phones, tracking Facebook, bombarding people with messages, revenge porn. So a lot of those things are in here too. Maybe getting a hold of financial records, opening accounts online, that type of thing. We can go to the next one. This is actually a very important one because this is one of the ones that deals completely with what it is. It doesn't stop after they leave. And if you'll notice this one, you begin to see what happens after separation. So you've got now they have the courts involved basically, and the courts become a tool. They may take you back to court over and over again to drain your financial resources. They may still be interfering with your employment. Now they can use their children and their parenting time. They can also maybe get other people involved, like a new girlfriend can happen there too. So I'm going to let you look at this all later because I want to get into the bills. So if we can go to the next one. Before I actually do this, I would like to actually point out that both men and women can be the victims of domestic violence. There is also domestic violence in same-sex marriages, or same-sex relationships. What they have, and you will find all kinds of different statistics and things like that. When I look at these statistics, because it came up today, when I look at these statistics, I don't use a lot of them. And if I do, I tend to try and get 2 or 3 sources and find out how they are to make them robust, because some of them look really weird or overly dramatic. What we do know is about 85%, between 80 and 85% of victims of domestic violence are women. Between 90 and 95% of perpetrators are men. We know that. And this is using the power and control dynamic. Because when they start talking about violence, you actually have to think, well, is it violence that has a power and control, that outside band? Or could it be defensive violence? Could it be a child being hit and the victim getting in the way or distracting them? Because there have actually been cases where they have had women who the father will go to hit the child and they will hit the father to protect the child and draw the beating onto themselves. That's physical. Right now, so these are the 2 bills. The first one is 1547, Senate Bill 1077, an act improving protections relative to domestic violence. The sponsors are Natalie Higgins and Tram Nguyen. Both of them worked as attorneys in the domestic violence sphere. I met Natalie Higgins spoke to the convention her first year in office. And Tram Nguyen, I actually had a conversation with her originally, and at the time she was the only bilingual attorney doing domestic violence in the lower courts that could do Vietnamese. And the Senate bill is Senator Michael Moore. Currently, the domestic violence law only recognizes physical violence or threat of immediate physical violence, which means if the person is kicking their dog, threatening to shoot you without having a gun present, threatening to stab you with one of the knives in the kitchen drawer, that does not constitute physical violence. and that therefore you cannot get a restraining order at this time in Massachusetts. It was a cutting edge law back in 1978. It needs updating. And one of the things that actually came up in the testimony is we had one woman who said, my attorneys won't even say the word coercive control or emotional abuse or economic abuse in court. So the update to the law would define coercive control as a pattern of threatening, humiliating, intimidating actions designed to make an individual dependent by isolating them from support, exploiting them, depriving them of independence, and regulating their everyday behavior. One of the first cases to use a coercive control definition was California, which passed their law 2 years ago. And in August, they had their first decision that came down under that law. And what the judge says is that it impeded the freedom of thought, action, and decision-making, engaged in a pattern of behavioral, which controlled and regulated her daily behavior, communications, and economic resource. It is a deprivation of liberty. I will say this is very important because one of the other things is once they change the definition of domestic violence in law to include all of these behaviors that they have known about for all this time, our position in where we stand will actually automatically update because we use the term domestic violence as well. So that's great. What they are asking is that you let your representatives and your senators know about it. If you are a constituent of Natalie Higgins, Tram Wen, Michael Moore, Natalie Blais, we'll get to her bill soon. Please thank them. Also, Christine Barber, who is the vice chair of the committee. She stayed through the entire hearing, which was over 7 hours long. And also, I did notice that Brandy Flukarokwi from the Boston delegation was there for most of the day too and supporting people. So those are the people that are there. And we can go on to the next bill. And then I'll stop and take some questions. This is kind of a companion bill. Originally, there were 3 bills, but one of them got passed in the budget, and I'll get to that in a minute. So this is House Bill 1399, Senate Bill 1079, an act relative to controlling and abusive litigation. Representative Natalie Blais from Franklin County and Senator Michael Moore. Earlier I said, if you check out Mass Families, Margie Palladino and Lori Johnson from MFAC did an incredible job with a report. Margie herself is an attorney, and so she is able to speak the attorney talk that I am not. And they have a very good assessment of how the courts are. What this does is it gives judges tools to stop abusers from using the court. And it allows the survivor. What happens right now is domestic violence when they can no longer get at their victim in the home or on the street, they are left with the courts to gain access to them. And because these cases come back over and over again, they can stay open for 3, 4, 5, 10, 15, 18 years. It becomes constant. And people have to come back over and over again. They have to take time off from work. They have to find childcare. They may not be able to even hold down a job because they're coming back. If they are able to afford an attorney, they rack up attorney charges. We are talking about people who are now paying over $100,000 in just attorney fees. They are draining down family resources. They are draining down retirement funds. They are losing their housing, all because they have just got to keep coming back to court over and over again. Not only would putting coercive control in as a definition, it would then be the judges would be able to say, this is coercive control. You are not allowed to come back unless you get everything pre-approved. It is a tool. Is it perfect? No, but it is an important tool. And I just want to point out a couple of things. somebody actually, it was actually brought up a couple of times in the hearing, and I had not heard it for a while, and once again, it rang true. It's not about trying to get out of child support. You will hear a lot of people say, oh, they keep bringing you back and they're doing this so they don't have to pay. There are cases where women are the higher earner who would be paying child support, where women waive child support and they are still being, or there are no children and they are still being dragged back in over and over and over again. One study in the Massachusetts courts found that 3/4 of the cases coming in for child custody, child visitation, and child support flagged for indicators of domestic violence, which include coercive control, on independent screening. What they actually found out is less than 4% of the time was it used by the judge. And this even includes the fact that about half of them had documentation, 209A restraining orders, or even pictures and medical reports in their file. They had hard copy evidence, and it still was denied by the courts because of sometimes they would say it was too long ago, or it wasn't sufficient, or it was coercive control. One other thing there were 2 other points. There was a study, and I had to do some backtracking and mangling it with it, is the cost of just this relitigation of these courses nationally comes in somewhere between $35.7 billion a year and $70 billion. I think it's probably about 51, but I'm using conservative estimates and say 37.5. By the way, that is the budget of Massachusetts, their state budget. That 51 billion is bigger than the budgets of all but 12 states. That's how much it costs the taxpayer. And that is before it gets to the individual costs, the individual lawyer attorney fees. That's the cost in court costs, in the economic supports, the basic needs supports, the SNAP, healthcare. 37 billion, 50 billion to the US taxpayer, and more to the individual. The other thing that actually came up in the hearing, which as I said was 7 hours long, is a lot of people were talking about trauma and PTSD, or post-traumatic stress syndrome. And it's trauma-induced. Judith Herman, who was who's been doing this for like almost 40 years, actually found in her research that women in the United States suffer from post-traumatic stress at 3 times the rate of combat veterans. So if we think about PTSD, we think about combat veterans. They're about 18% of the cases. Women who have been the victims of violence, including coercive control, are 66% of the people suffering from PTSD in the United States. And here's the whole thing. That's post-traumatic, after. For a combat veteran, that means you are leaving the battlefield and you are going home. And once you are home, you are safe, and that is post. However, for victims of domestic violence, or I frequently call it intimate partner violence or intimate partner abuse. Sometimes we call it intimate partner terrorism. Home is the battlefield. Home is not the safe place. Home is the battlefield. And when they actually get out, they are then thrown into another battleground, the courts. And they are not safe till they escape that. And so you can just, all those stories you hear about combat veterans. Once again, the request is that you let your elected representatives, your senators, your representatives know about them, ask them to report it out of the committee favorably, and when it gets to the floor, they vote for it. I want to pause right here. Anybody have any quick questions on these two? Because I'll take even more questions at the end. Okay, we can go on to the next one. This is kind of a related one. This is an act to mandate domestic violence and sexual awareness education for estheticians, barbers, cosmetologists, electrologists, hairdressers, manicurists, and massage therapists. I keep calling it DV training for salon employees. Christine Barber is actually the person who's been introducing his session after session. She is the vice chair of the judiciary. She stayed there through all 7+ hours. Yes, Tuesday. This has been reintroduced a couple of times. One of the things that, if you go back to those wheels, we talked about isolation. And abusers try to isolate their victims. Salons are one of the few places that victims are on monitors. They often see signs of abuse and they need to know how to respond. I did talk to people that I know who are hairdressers and things like that, and they would say, yeah, they flip over to wash your hair and they can see finger marks on the back of your neck where you've been strangled. Several of them said this is actually supported by the industry. This is kind of interesting. It is supported by the industry. It is supported by seemingly everyone. This is actually a training program that was developed by advocates and the industry. It is online. It is approximately 1 hour and is at no cost. Yet, I think this is the 4th session, that legislative session, it has been introduced and it has not been passed. So this is it's just one of those bills. It has had its hearing. It is in professional licensure, and it's a simple bill. I don't know why it hasn't passed. Okay, no questions. Let's go on to the next one. Now, opposition bills, we don't oppose a lot of bills. We tend to support them. But this is one that this has been a refile for several years. There's actually a whole backstory behind it. It was based in a case of sexual abuse from the 60s and 70s that the town, which is an affluent suburb, white, well-educated, we can put all of those details in, and they designed a training program for town employees. They thought this was so great that we should have it statewide. Here's the thing. Mandated reporters, the mandated reporter kind of idea came out of the 1962 book, Expose, The Battered Child, which was literally abuse. And the first mandated reporters were medical professionals. They are still medical report, things like that. And it worked. They would see broken bones. They would see cigarette burns on kids. And they were now mandated to report. They did. By 1974, the Child Abuse and Protection Treatment Act, CAPTA, mandated reporter statutes in every state. But here's the thing. In that 50 years, there has been no evidence that mandated reporting makes children safer. In fact, it's actually kind of the opposite. 73% of the studies have reported that involvement with the, even just an investigation from a report has ended up with negative child outcomes. Medical professionals, let's go back to the medical professionals again. 84% of their reports report physical abuse, broken bones, burns, that type of thing, and are supported. If you take all of the rest of them, which are teachers and social workers and law enforcement and clergy, and you get down to it, the reports are either screened out, they're investigated and closed and unsubstantiated, they are opened and then closed when it reaches case management, or they are overturned on fair hearing or by the courts. They have a 91% failure rate. 91% of mandated reporter reports outside of physical abuse reported by medical professionals is wrong, basically. But within that, there were all kinds of reports. You'll hear all kinds of things about the problems with the foster care system, that type of thing. I'm not even going there. And believe me, I could. But here's the ones that I actually wanted to tell you about. We have low-income and immigrant, and families of color are disproportionately targeted. Families with disabilities have a 300% higher risk of being referred to child welfare services. And in approximately 49%, 50% of them, the only reason they are being referred is that the parent has a disability. I have a sister who's blind. She's fabulous with kids, but she would actually be at a 300% higher risk if she had her own children. And we've been doing a lot on domestic violence. There have been studies that have found that if domestic violence victims find out that there is a mandated reporter, 23% of them that would seek help choose not to. 61% then minimize or change what they're going to report. So it might be, instead of he punched me or threatened me with a knife, it might be, well, he slapped me or he grabbed my wrist, as opposed to putting a gun to my head, or in the case of somebody I know, a power drill to her temple. So there's a big difference from grabbing your wrist and putting a power drill to your temple and grabbing a wrist. And that's what might happen. And what's even more so is when they actually took a look at they went back and did qualitative studies of the people afterwards. Approximately over half of them said that it had actually made something worse. Going back to those wheels again, one of the things that abusers do is they will get allies. And in this case, the allies become the Child Protective Services, because they are not trained either. One of the things in 2015, there was a complaint and a finding, an investigation done by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, U.S. Department of Justice, Offices of Civil Rights, and it found against the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Among other fun and exciting things that was stated in there, and this one was my favorite, is they were asking what the criteria for substantiating a case. And the DCF investigator said, well, sometimes you just get a vibe whether they can do it or not. So it is not beyond a reasonable doubt. It is not a preponderance of the evidence. It's not even kind of reasonable person standard. It's, did you get a vibe? And when we actually take a look at the law does strange things. It says in your professional capacity, a janitor at a school is a mandated reporter because he works at a school. His professional capacity to assess whether a child is being abused. And because of the way the law is structured, it will often be the protective parent or the mother or the custodial parent that is the person who is held responsible and case managed, even if it is somebody. So we're going back to our DV case. You have a protective mother. She has custody of the child. The child goes off for visitation. The father's girlfriend abuses the kid. The mother is the one that has the case opened. So no evidence. And I will also tell you, Pennsylvania, after Jerry Sandusky's case down in Pennsylvania, 2014, they passed a universal mandated reporter, which made everyone in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, every adult, a mandated reporter under penalty of law. And what they found out is that reports to the hotline went up 50 to 80%, but they actually had statistically approximately the same ordinal number, the same number of cases, but they were screening and investigating almost more than half again, the caseload. They are actually worried that they are missing cases because of the mandated reporter statute. Also found a study someplace, and I don't have the citation, so I can't give it to you right now, is that in more than half of the cases, if someone has found to be, knows they were mandated reporter, they are more likely to report than help. And that can turn a family that is having a tough time. Maybe the breadwinner lost his job. Maybe the grandmother died. Maybe the family pet died. This family is suffering from some kinds of transitory trauma. Mandated reporters can put them into the system for life. Do I have any questions now that I've done all this happy thing? So happy thoughts. All right. Just I'll let you digest all of this because I know I come at you like a freight train. Carol?
Okay, I think I'm off mute. So you talked about the, I think a couple of those issues. We are a part of a group, a coalition with like 100 some groups, right? Which just amazed me. I'm just wondering how the league, how do you do that logistically? How do we decide, we have a position, they may want to go further than where we are, or we're not as far or something. How do you sort of negotiate that? With other people's positions?
I'm assuming you're actually looking at the SNAP Coalition, the Feeding Our Neighbors, and
Yeah.
Lift Our Cap. They're actually really very good. These particular coalitions are people are very experienced. They coalition members have a number of different things the individual organizations do. These particular coalitions are use very tight focus. So for track, it's just those two bills. For Feeding Our Neighbors, it's one bill. For Lift Our Cap, Lift Our Kids, it's one bill.
I see.
That is it. Sometimes another bill may come up. For instance, the Lift Our Kids coalition wanted to sign on to something that was a long line. They will actually send it out to the membership. If we get a letter saying, would you sign this? And sometimes even for like, say, budget advocacy for the bill that we're supporting, we will get a letter. They will send it to us. They will say, if you can sign on, please let us know. We get it. We send it off to I would get it. We'll send it to the board. The board will then actually sign off on something outside of the bill. So even if it's a supporting a budget measure that actually aligns with the bill, we will still go through that process. But these are very tight coalitions. It is on the bill, and that's kind of, does that answer your question?
It does, yes. Thank you very
much. We've got Sharon.
Yes, hi, Palma. Will these bills be in a packet for us to use for Day on the Hill on October 11th? I hope.
All of these are on, you'll be getting these slides. All of this information, including the testimony that I have not finished for the two bills that I already testified on, will be on the website as well, which is in there. I know they are still putting together the packets for Day on the Hill. The priority bills at that point, because they've already were already decided on, are an elections bill, forever chemicals or PFAS, the gun bill, and maternal health. These bills have come up fast. We did not expect them to kind of like roar into this full-on court press. You are absolutely welcome to talk about these bills. You're welcome to send things like that. I don't know what the package is going to look like yet, but these bills came up really fast. I will tell you there is a component to the gun bill, because guns are used. In fact, there's an increased rate of actual physical harm. In fact, in 47% of cases where the perpetrator believes they can get a hold of a gun, in other words, say maybe a family member has a gun or something like that, they will actually threaten the victim with gun violence. That came out of a report from the Gabby Giffords Center, that just believing they could get a hold of a gun increases the likelihood that they will be threatened with a gun, even if the gun isn't present at the time. So, and
all this brought together would be great for Day on the Hill. I really think we should advocate for this.
Yeah.
Just my 2 cents. If you can put a good word into Bryn or.
I have to be honest, I am like fully behind this. As I was telling Rep. Higgins today, Margie came to the LAC saying, we have this, we want to do something with it. Wellesley is going to run a Zoom program on it. I took a look at this. I took a look at the bill that had Natalie Higgins' name attached to it. And as I was saying today in our meeting with Rep. Higgins, I said, I nearly cried. I said, this is such a game changer. So, Margie was trying to say something. I love Margie.
I'm
Can you
looking
unmute?
for I was looking for my raise my hand and I can't find it. So I'm just raising my hand naturally here. So thank you so much, Palma, for all you're doing and for tracking these bills and for explaining them so easily to us. I mean, I think I understand things now that I didn't before this began. So that's helpful. And I loved your wheels too of the in the domestic violence area. As you mentioned, there was the hearing on Tuesday, and it was a 7-hour long hearing. And it, what we're hoping for now is that that it will move forward. So could you just explain how if it does move forward, how it moves forward, and when would it, assuming best case scenario, like when would it be put for a vote?
Best case scenario is that it gets voted in the committee. The Committee on the Judiciary will vote it out favorably. Bills need to be out of committee by the 3rd Wednesday in February of the 2nd year of the session.
Yep, February 7th, 20.
Yeah, something like that. Jen has it. So they need to be voted out at that point. Some action needs to be taken. It either needs to be voted out or it is sent to study, which means killed. Judiciary has almost every year, because they have more bills than anybody else, gotten an extension on that, sometimes going into May or something like that. But best case scenario, it is voted out sometime between now and February. Looking at the bills, we do not think they need to go to another committee. Sometimes we've been surprised. There was a bill at one point that had one line about health insurance in it, and it ended up having to come out of Judiciary, and it went to 2 other committees. One of which being healthcare financing, and the other one, then it had to go to Ways and Means. We don't think there's a financial component to this, so it may even be able to skip Ways and Means. If that is the case, if they vote it out, there is nothing in there that we haven't picked up on, it will go to one or the other chamber. Probably the House first. My guess would be the House, because of the work that Natalie Blade, Natalie Higgins, and Tram Nguyen has been doing. It will go to the House. It will go to the House Scheduling Committee. They will then put it into the orders of the day. They will go through the first, second, third reading. They will do debates. They will do amendments. They will do a vote. Best case scenario is that it goes really fast that way. A lot of that depends on leadership at that point. It gets engrossed to go to the other chamber, which would be the Senate. It will go through the same process. It will go to scheduling. It will go to reading 1, 2, 3. They will do debates. They will take a vote. Hopefully it passes. If they pass exactly the same bill, down to the commas, it then can go straight to the governor. If they change even one word or change the punctuation or anything like that, it then has to go to conference committee. Conference committee will then work out everything out. It will then go back to the House, back to the Senate for votes, and hopefully get to the governor's desk. And hopefully all of that will happen before July 31st of next year, because that is when the Senate, when the Massachusetts legislature ends its formal session. Technically, things can be passed in informal session, but they have to be done by universal consent. So everybody has to go with it. That is best case scenario, is that it is voted out favorably by the committee at some time soon enough, so that maybe we can get it moving while they do the budget next year, because next spring is also budget time again, and they will be doing that as well as everything else. So that's best case scenario. It goes through everything. Not best case scenario. We get to July 31st. It's still stuck in a house somewhere, has not gone to the governor. I don't think the governor, I'm not going to worry about the governor vetoing it if it gets there. It kind of dies for the year, and it will be reintroduced in January of 2025. And we get to start all over again. Well, maybe not all over again. So.
Thank you.
excitement, isn't it? On the other hand, if it does get through, then we can take all of those other things that have come up during our advocacy and ask people to file bills on that now in January of 2025. So we have come up with, along the ways, we've come up with things like GAL standards and accountability, health insurance issues, representation and council issues, health, training issues. So we've come
I
up
think
with all
Chris
of these
has a
issues.
question.
Oh, I'm
I think
sorry.
Chris has a question and we're coming up on almost 8 o'clock. So
Oh, I'm
Chris,
sorry. So sorry. I don't see the other question.
Chris, yep.
It is someone else ahead of me. Okay, I have two questions. I'll say them before you can. Number one, in your expert opinion, do you think that the testimonies and the presentations matter? And number two, what can we do in the meantime between now and, I've got the best case all written down. What can we do to help and push it over the goal line?
Yes, testimony absolutely positively matters. The most important thing for almost any elected representative is they hear from their constituents. So that's number one, your constituents. If you know somebody who lives a couple of streets over, has a couple of towns over, have them call too. The testimony does help. Once again, I have to applaud the people who were testifying on Tuesday. Those testimonies were tight. They were on point. They were beautifully crafted. They sent the message. I have never been at 7 hours. I was totally impressed. I actually kind of do believe in Aristotle's 3 rules: ethos, pathos, logos. The authority to speak, the story to tell, and the data. And I think we covered it all. And that is what they listen for. That and the people that vote and will vote for them, hear from you. So, any other questions?
I had a question. I had noticed that they gave us some handouts when we were checking in, and it had like a list of a bunch of different bills. How do we find out about like those other bills, like in terms of like I was surprised to see so many bills that I felt were so similar to ours. And then I felt like I was, advocating for our 2 bills, but then there were so many other bills that I was also like, wow, I should have said that I advocated for that. So I don't know, I guess just in the future, like being able to advocate for other bills as well. Like, I don't know how to go about doing that.
For anybody who doesn't know, this is Tia. She's from Boston. She actually went to her first hearing and testified for her very first time at that marathon hearing.
Yeah, it was long.
If anybody has not been to a hearing, you can actually see them online. They are archived now because they are hybrid, so most places are archiving it. I do actually have to say one more thing about this hearing. It was the first hearing that I've been at that they have allowed people to testify anonymously. They turned off the recording cameras, they turned off the screens, and they let people testify that way. Even some people who were testifying in person, they turned off the camera, so they are not recorded. They are also under pseudonyms in some cases. I don't know if anyone saw the kerfuffle back in June. There was a lobby day for these 2 bills that was sponsored by Natalie Blais and Senator Moore, I believe, and Natalie Higgins and Tram Nguyen. The State House News did a really interesting article on it, and Carmen won't mind. Carmen spoke at it. She did not mention who her abuser was. No one mentioned the abusers. They did it completely from their own perspective. And yet the following day, one by one, we saw the survivor stories from that lobby day scrubbed from the news coverage because State House News was threatened with a lawsuit if they did not remove the data. And even though Carmen did say, I will provide you with all of my records, they would not cover it. They were literally silencing victims. She herself got a 16-page letter from her ex's attorneys threatening her with a defamation suit because she testified without mentioning names to things that are in the public record. Her abuse that is in the public record. As to that list of bills, that is the list of entire, one of the things you do if you've been in hearing, if nobody's been in a hearing in the State House themselves, is generally the committee will actually have a hard copy of the list of bills that they are hearing in that session. And you can go to the MA legislature.gov and look them up by bill number. So, and read the text. Sometimes the titles are a little deceptive. We have bills that may be filed in the Senate and the House that have the same title, but are different bills, which is kind of always fun to try and catch.
But maybe is there a specific organization you could recommend when you see their legislative priorities specifically? You trust those 4 or 5 bills to support them, and then Tia and any colleagues could like follow the progress through those organizations, maybe either through the Track Coalition or through MFAC or Jane Doe, or, you know, maybe you could recommend like certain organizations they could follow.
Well, because the judiciary has so many bills, Tuesday's hearing was strictly on domestic violence and sexual assault. So there are coalitions, for instance, Track is doing the changing the domestic violence definition to include coercive control, and they're doing abusive litigation. They were also doing supporting a bill which the League supported to increase the number of judges in the family court because they are so overburdened. I believe in the trial court, each judge handles about 200 cases. In the family court right now, they handle 2,200. And once again, I'm going to go back and remind you that some of these cases go on for years, and people will have 3, 4, and 5 judges over the course of the time because they actually retire at some point, but their cases are still going on. So that was actually passed in the budget. Huge deal. It's the first increase in the family court since 2000. Other bills that were covered are things like the Pass the Trash, which is if a school gets a complaint about, say, abuse from a teacher, they can't just fire them and have them go someplace else. I thought it was passed 8 years ago, but I guess I was wrong. Removing the statute of limitations on rape kits if DNA is present. And so there were a lot of bills that were actually covered. That was all that was covered. And just sexual assault and domestic violence. So, and Jane Doe does cover a lot of them in general.
Chris, did you have another question?
I do. I have 100 questions, but I'll only do 2 more. I don't know the system like you do. Have there been an attempt, or is it not appropriate to go for this at the federal level?
Okay, if we go back it up to the federal level is actually the Violence Against Women Act, which was actually just reauthorized in 2022. I sent out, when I was going to find the hearing on, at the hearing, I heard a name, Sarah Buell. I could not remember where I heard the name Sarah Buell.
Excellent. I watched it.
I found so I'm trying to figure out who Sarah Buell is, and what ended up coming up was a C-SPAN recording of a hearing that took place just before Christmas in 1990. It was of the Senate Judiciary Committee at the federal level. They were discussing a bill that Senator Joseph Biden had introduced in 1989. This was 1990, just before Christmas, and it is the hearing there. I swear, if I did not know better, we could have picked that hearing up and dropped it into Tuesday's hearing. That bill he filed in 1989 went through 3 legislative sessions, and in 1995 it was passed as the Violence Against Women Act, which was then reauthorized in 2002 actually is when it was it was then reauthorized in, I believe, 2008. When it expired in 2015, for some reason it became very controversial. Among other, one part of the reasons it became controversial were things like allowing tribal governments and civil authorities to cooperate and to have cross-jurisdictional thing like that, because we actually have a problem with Indigenous women experiencing sexual and domestic violence at a higher rate than other segments of the population. And because you were having situations where a non-native person was say, raping an indigenous woman on a reservation, the tribal authorities did not have authority to prosecute, and the civil authorities did not have authority to arrest and prosecute. So it was basically a free pass. In the mid-2000s, there was pushback. They didn't want to include that. They've been trying to close the boyfriend loophole and the gun show loophole on guns and domestic violence. In fact, we are now actually fighting because of a court decision with this current Supreme Court to maintain red flag laws. And if someone gets a restraining order, they have their guns taken away. And there were laws in place. Actually, I think Jen knows these laws better than I do. So we have situations like that. It was reauthorized last year. Joe Biden signed the reauthorization last year. And so we're now into our next things like that. But a lot of these things we're talking about are coming down from the federal level and going up. Federal government is providing a lot of the money for things like shelters, SANE training, so sexual assault nurse examiner training. So they provide that. They have stop grants that are coming into the courts to improve court, things like that. That's federal money as well. So work is being done on the federal level, state level, it covers things. So we've got both things going on. I will also tell you the league is actually has an international observer corps, and they work with the UN as an observer, and they have been backing CEDAW, which is the Convention on Eradication of all forms of all discrimination and all forms of violence against women. I'm not quite sure what it is. It's CEDAW. It has actually passed the Judiciary Committee. It was signed years ago. It's been presented to the Senate. They have gone through the Judiciary Committee twice, and they have not been able to get it to the floor for ratification. But there is something called Cities for CEDAW. Boston has introduced it as a resolution. Several places in California, I believe Maryland is and some places on the West Coast. That actually includes coercive control. So the United States, or the League of Women Voters on the international level, has been pushing for coercive control as part of the intimate partner violence protections. Or sometimes internationally you'll hear it called gender-based violence. So up and down, there is work being done, and there is incredible pushback by groups that call themselves fathers' rights groups or men's rights groups, or now they're frequently calling them parents' rights groups. I will tell you, in 2012, the Southern Poverty Law Center put these groups on their hate watch list. So fathers' rights groups have actually been, you actually have to watch them. Some of them actually meet the definition of hate groups. So.
Okay, thank you, Palma. That was wonderful. Thank you for all that. It's a mountain range of knowledge, so we appreciate your time and everyone's time. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to stop the recording. And Palma, maybe could you put your email in the chat? If people have more questions, they could contact you. I'm going to go ahead and stop.
We are sending the slides out, and I know this has been posted on the